Good evening, everyone. I hope you've had a gloriously beautiful day. Um, as we work through this study on how Jesus saves, we're really at the halfway point now. You're beginning week 4 of 6. And the thing that really gripped my attention in chapter 2, in week 3 of this study, is how Josh takes us back to that figure from medieval history, Julian of Norwich. And yes, Julian is a woman's name. Sometimes you'll see it Juliana, but she was a woman. And you've probably heard or seen somewhere one of her most famous lines, in which she says, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." Isn't that a beautiful picture of where history is moving, the trajectory of salvation towards new creation and God setting everything right? And the root of Julian's grasp on that reality actually came during that series of visions she had when she was dying, supposedly from the plague, and God restored her and healed her. And in the midst of that illness, she had several visions of the cross and the victory that was won through the cross of Jesus, and the ultimate all shall be well effects from that victory. And so Josh uses that to get us into thinking about Jesus as the second Adam, the one who is able to have a victory that rebounds and resounds to our good, because he is the true head in whose image the first Adam was made. When God says, "Let us create man in our image," Christ was there and was part of that. And so when Jesus chooses to take on human flesh, this is really the one in whose image all of humanity was created, and he's now assuming the limitations of that, but without the sin. And this concept of the image of God is something that I want us to spend a little bit of time with this evening. It's right at the heart of how Wesleyans understand salvation. The image of God that was put within Adam and Eve at creation has been universally marred and distorted by sin, but it is still universally present. In other words, every human being you meet is still an image bearer, whether that image is tarnished almost beyond recognition or not. And what Wesley grasped so beautifully about this reality, about the tarnished and torn and distorted nature of the image within us, is that we as human beings, we don't even have the capacity to turn towards God. We don't even have the capacity to respond to God unless his grace is drawing us. And that's what Wesley called prevenient grace, the grace that goes before. And Wesley taught, and scripture bolsters this teaching, that God's prevenient grace is active in the lives of every single human being. The work that Christ did on the cross and the victory that he gained has efficacy. It works. It's effective for every single human being. And God is wooing every human being towards himself. That's his prevenient grace. And when a person takes the step to return, to respond to that prevenient grace, that preparing grace, when a person takes the step of saying, "Jesus is Lord," and asking for forgiveness and restoration, that is justifying grace, that new birth. It removes the sin nature that so distorted the image of God, and it restores that image within us, not perfectly, but certainly restored fully within us. And then God's grace doesn't just abandon us. It's not just a one and done. It's not just, okay, got my fire insurance, I'll go to heaven when I die. No, God's grace is persistent beyond the new birth. It's what we call sanctifying grace. God's Spirit is actively involved in daily, minute by minute, conforming us more and more to the image of Christ. And I want us to stop here just for a minute and understand that the image of God from the very beginning has reflected the triune God. Let us make man in our image, the Godhead says in Genesis 1. And the fact that God himself is community, three persons, one essence, means that the image of God also is a community experience. And particularly the process of our sanctification, our holiness, our being made more like Jesus is something that happens in community. That's why Wesley would say famously, there is no personal holiness without social holiness. And by social, he meant in community, something happening in the context of the community of believers. And it is for all of this, the prevenient grace, which prepares us, the justifying grace, which saves us and restores the image in us, and sanctifying grace that calls us and shapes us into a closer reflection of Jesus' own character. For all of that, Jesus died. And for all of that, the cross is effective. So what are some of the implications of this? I want us to think about people, the people that we meet every day, the ones we don't know, the ones that'll just get a hi, how are you? The ones that we know and don't love too much, the ones that we wish we didn't have to rub shoulders with, all of the people that we meet on a daily basis. In those persons is the image of God. And in those persons, the grace of God is at work. Maybe it's sanctifying grace because they've already come into a relationship with him. Maybe it's justifying grace because they're taking that step of new birth. But in many cases, it will be that prevenient, that preparing grace. And here's the question. If we accept this, then how does that shape and affect the way we see the human beings we encounter, the way we speak to them and speak about them, the way we treat the other? There are deep implications here for how we engage with other human beings. And then there's a question that turns to those of us who have experienced justifying grace, who have been born again, who are on a journey of sanctification with Jesus. Do we value this journey enough? If God valued so much the restoration of his image in us that Jesus was willing to pay the ultimate price for us, then what is our response to sanctifying grace? And are we willing and enthusiastic collaborators with the Spirit of God in the process of making us more and more like Jesus? And then what are the implications of the image of God necessarily reflecting the social and communal nature of the Godhead? What are the implications of that for our sanctification? Are we privatizing our religion? Or are we allowing it to be personal and yet communal, personal and yet collective, personal and yet social, in a way that honors the picture that Scripture paints of the image of God. So there's a lot to chew on, a lot to think about there. I would encourage you to pause the video at any point and think about some of these concepts. Make sure you're engaging with Romans chapter 5 and what Paul has to say there. And any questions you have, feel free to put them in the comments and we can chat about them there. God bless you.